Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Tuesday afternoon as Georgia and the rest of the country goes to the transfer portal season. And doesn't feel real, but this is only the, eighth day that the portal has been open as we're recording this. A lot of news, both in terms of who has left Georgia, who Georgia is targeting. We're going to get into that. We're going to get into the GHSA state championships. Ben's had a chance to go to those, and there will be several more as this week goes on. We're going to talk about the college football playoff. Going to have some big games this weekend, including the game that will determine who Georgia plays in the Sugar Bowl. And we'll also talk some Georgia basketball toward the end. But fellas, let's start with the portal. That's going to be the brunt of this episode, is focused on the transfer portal. Since the last time we recorded, which was Thursday, there's been 4 other Georgia players who have entered the portal. That is safety Justin Rhett, safety Jake Pope, inside linebacker Troy Bowles, and outside linebacker Samuel Mpemba. I would say that none of these are a shock given where they were on the depth chart, given how little they had played. But I'll start with you, Kipp. Did any of those catch your eye? Anything kind of stand out to you with the latest batch of guys who've gone in the portal?
I mean, no, if you're not seeing major minutes right now, I think that's kind of the writing on the wall with the transfer portal now is guys want to know that they're in a situation to gain playing time heading into the spring. And I think that's been a lot of discussion with the transfer portal right now is the calendar. You know, teams are in the playoff right now. We just saw like Penn State's backup quarterback say he's going to go into the portal while his team's in the playoff because he doesn't really feel like he has a choice. And that's really because you want to get that leg up on, spring practice in the playbook. So for everyone who says just move it to after the spring, I think for the players, they want those extra practice times to give themselves a chance to earn new playing time. And then at the same time, I mean, if you're down the depth chart after the spring, it kind of puts you in kind of a tougher situation. You got to go into fall camp at that point and try to catch up with other guys. So I think with most of these guys, you kind of knew even looking towards next year that in their respective position rooms, they were behind some other guys, including, the incoming freshman class probably projected, to compete with them and maybe pass them in the spring. So it kind of makes sense. And at the same time with Georgia, it also makes sense why you haven't seen any incoming guys because this roster's pretty strong from top to bottom.
Yeah, I think that's something that people have to keep in mind when you look at this team and, all these other teams are so much busier in the portal. Georgia's still in a pretty good spot roster-wise when it comes to who they're anticipating to come back. And, I don't think they need to go out and make these big moves that some of these other teams need to. I think especially, Kipp, you hit on it. I mean, where some of these guys are on the depth chart and look at, like, specifically a Troy Bowles, who, this is no disrespect to him, but you had Chris Cole and Justin Williams pass him on the depth chart, playing a bigger role. I mean, it just seemed obvious that he was going to move on. And to Troy's credit, I mean, he's gotten some good interest in the portal. I know he visited Florida State. I think there's a few other schools interested in him. It's a good opportunity for those guys to go on, find a new home, and have a chance to play somewhere else. Ben, anything stand out to you as far as this latest group that is preparing to leave Georgia?
Well, there haven't been any surprises to me, and aside from Jarrett, there really haven't been anybody that have had snap counts that I think you would even consider meaningful for the next 3 games necessarily. I think this does speak to what Kirby Smart has talked about all year long and how much harder it is to retain depth in the current environment. Like, you're not necessarily worried about losing your ones. Sometimes you're not even necessarily worried about losing your top twos, but like when you're thinking about, some of your, fringe twos or your threes, it's hard to keep those guys on your roster, especially when you're at a place like Georgia, because those types of guys that are threes at Georgia can play at a lot of other places. And I think that's what you're seeing here. I also think, you're going to see 2 portal windows, essentially. You're going to see what's happening right now, which is Georgia figuring out, who needs to go now. And I think most of the guys leaving now are people that Georgia was not expecting to have many snaps in the playoff. Again, aside from Josh Jarrett. And then 2, guys that they feel like it would help them to get into the portal now, be able to find a home for them. Like if you wait until after the playoff, you are not guaranteed to have a home with as many guys that are in the portal right now and as many programs that are trying to act on filling out their roster right now rather than waiting. And so I think that there are certain guys on Georgia's roster that they could leave now or they could leave in 3 months and someone's going to want them for their 2025 season. Those are the types of guys that you're not going to see their names enter. And that's not just for Georgia. That's for any of these top programs. Those are the names that you're going to see enter in that 5-day window after the season is complete, because they don't have to worry about those types of things. Guys that are entering the portal right now, they probably have larger concerns about what their final destination can be and where their home can be. And when I'm saying that, I'm talking about the playoff teams, not so much the teams who just have bowl games remaining. Many of those players have already entered the portal, and it makes sense why they're just moving forward with things.
If my count is right, Georgia now has 7 players who have entered the portal. 6 have yet to announce where they're going next. The lone exception to this point is Julian Humphrey. The cornerback has committed to Texas A&M. Makes a lot of sense for Julian. He's a guy that spoke pretty openly this spring. He had toyed with going into the portal after last season. He wanted to get closer to home. He's from Houston. And this one kind of felt telegraphed, guys. I've made sure and put this on the Junkyard board that the night before he went into the portal, he was posting on Instagram the Kyle Field, because that was Texas A&M. He kind of telegraphed, I think, where he was going to go. But Ben, what do you think about Julian's decision, and especially him choosing Texas A&M, that's where he's going to be next?
Well, I'll admit when he was departing, I wasn't tracking super closely where he was going to be winding up, but I sort of figured that he was going to end up back at one of the Texas schools. And I know Texas A&M, there was, when they had their coaching change last go around, or last year, he obviously flirted with the portal on multiple occasions, last portal calendar year as well. And so it wasn't ever surprising, I don't think, to see him enter, especially once he lost that starting job. And I think Texas A&M makes a lot of sense. They're trying to, build a defense with talented NFL measurable type of guys. And, for any of the criticisms that Georgia folks might have about Julian Humphrey and the way that he handled it or how he played at certain points during the season, he definitely has tools that are attractive to a program that's trying to build a Georgia-like defense. And so it's no surprising that Mike Elko, prioritized him really early in the portal cycle. And, he's someone that Georgia won't have to play. I sort of wondered, was there a chance that he'd end up at a place like Texas as well? And Georgia might have to face him next year, barring any postseason matchups between Georgia and Texas A&M. He's probably going to be able to avoid playing his former team.
Several people on the Junkyard noted that, and I don't know if that went into the decision, but that definitely is notable, I think. Kipp, any thoughts on Julian Humphrey headed to College Station?
Well, we talked about this battle for the other cornerback position, and this last offseason, they had Humphrey thinking about it. You had Daniel Harris as well. You had to basically convince both guys who were competing for the other cornerback spot, and technically neither cornerback spot was locked in, but we had a good feeling, Dalen Everett would get one of those spots, but you had to convince both those guys to come back and compete for it. And it's interesting because if you kind of look ahead to the spring, I feel a little bit we're going to be having deja vu, because who have we been talking about, all season as far as not really seeing the field yet? Well, Ellis Robinson. Well, do you think he's just going to lock in on that cornerback spot, replacing Dalen Everett? I don't think so. And I do think that you look at, Camelo Jones. Both those guys are going to be in a very similar situation to what we saw with Humphrey and, Harris this offseason. So I just think that is going to be the new norm. I think you're going to have to, after the spring, convince both those guys to do the exact same thing you just had. And I guess, while that might be frustrating for fans, I think that's just it. Like, if these guys know that they could play at a lot of different places, and I'm sure if you looked into their social media accounts or their phones, that they're being told by, double-digit programs right now that they could start all across the country. That's just part of what you're going to have to do to retain your roster. So when you look at Georgia not being aggressive in the transfer portal, you do have to remember that a huge part of Georgia's NIL and recruiting is retaining this roster, a lot of effort. So you think about Kirby Smart and his coaching staff. They're trying to prepare for a college football playoff. They've earned the number 2 seed and have a chance to win a national championship, but they also have to try to retain these players who are playing pivotal roles, like you said, with Anthony Evans. I mean, this is a guy that could be involved in the return game, a major part of this game plan for Georgia, and they're just having to convince him, hey, stay on the roster. That is the new norm right now, and I just think that moving forward, you have to understand that these guys do want to play, and now that they have the opportunity to go somewhere else if they want to, that this is just going to be the situation on an annual basis.
You saw that too with Nitro Tuggle, with him saying he was going to go in, and then I think Georgia did a good job convincing him, hey, just stay put, and cooler heads prevail, and Nitro is going to stick around, which I think is really big for Georgia. Now, guys, we started this podcast talking about the guys leaving Georgia. Let's talk about some potential additions for Georgia. No one has committed from the portal yet for the Bulldogs as we record this on Tuesday afternoon, but that does not mean that Georgia has not been keying in on some guys. Several receivers that we've reported at Dogs 24/7 that the Bulldogs have been looking at. Very interesting. Former Alabama quarterback Dylan Lonergan, who went to Brookwood. He is taking a visit to Georgia. Very interesting corner, Ethan O'Connor from Washington State. He was here over the weekend. There's several guys that Georgia has reached out to, several others who have also visited, but we're still kind of waiting to see where Georgia is in some of these pursuits, in these recruitments. But I'll start with you, Ben. Has anyone stood out to you or maybe even surprised you as far as that Georgia's reached out to, or anyone that has really caught your interest of these targets that we've seen to this point?
Well, I mean, I think naturally, given the quarterback position right now and people's curiosities looking into next year and sort of the weird timing of it all, with Gunner for the first time stepping into a starting role right around the time that Georgia now needs to be looking for a possible candidate to give him a competition next year. It's all weird, but I think that it makes for really intriguing. Like when these guys are coming on visits, it's intriguing. And I think, to me, I'll say right now, in the portal as in general, there's only one quarterback to me, and that's the Washington State quarterback, John Mateer. That's like a clear cut, like this guy is coming in as a surefire starter with experience who, has the ability to step into pretty much any room probably and say like, he's the best guy in this room. Other than that, I think that Georgia's not involved in that recruitment as far as I know. So to me, Georgia is very clearly looking for guys that can give Gunner Stockton a push, make it competitive. I think sitting here right now, I'm saying something that I maybe would not have said, definitely not 2 months ago, but maybe not even a month ago. Like, I do think Gunner Stockton is going to be Georgia's starting quarterback in the 2025 season. And I think that Georgia is approaching this whole thing the way that they would if Gunner Stockton was going to be the starting quarterback for the 2025 season, but they wanted to have some contingency plans just in case. And so, the Charlotte quarterback, Deshaun Purdy, I really like, this guy's film. Like, you go look at, he had 10 touchdown passes this season. I think every single one of them, except for his first of the year, were at least 20 yards. So, I mean, this is a guy that is able to push the ball down the field for scores. I think he had 4 of his 10 touchdowns were at least 40-yard touchdown passes. And so this is a guy that I really, really like. He's obviously not going to be as polished as some of the premier QB1 types that you want to come in and step in and be your starting quarterback right away. But that's not what I think Georgia is looking for right now. The same can be said for Dylan Lonergan. You mentioned him taking a visit to Georgia. Like, it feels to me like Georgia is looking for the right option to be the guy, sort of fighting for that number 2 spot with Puglisi or Rashada or whoever it is that's still here at this point in time, and then giving a push to Gunner Stockton. And should Gunner Stockton go down, which, you normally aren't talking about contingency plans with Georgia quarterbacks because they stay healthy and they're not getting touched very often. But now we're seeing Carson Beck go down, and we now are having the conversation of, All right, now you need to sort of think about who is your number 2 QB. And I think, as strongly as you might feel about Ryan Puglisi, I think having a guy with some experience or has been around college football a little bit longer is ideal. And we've talked about this now for a few cycles as Georgia's been trying to put together 2 quarterback classes, and then they've been losing guys here and there. Like, they want to create some class separation between these guys if they can. And so it's not easy to do. Dylan Lonergan, I think, gives you an opportunity to do that a little bit more than Deshaun Purdy does, but that's not going to be the end-all decision-making for why they take one quarterback versus the other. But I'm fascinated by what they do there, and I'm not 100% convinced that those are the only 2 guys that are in consideration right now. But those are the 2 guys that have visited, and so they've come to the forefront.
Yeah, I'm with you, Ben. I think as it stands, Gunner is your quarterback in 2025. I found it fascinating when Fernando Mendoza from Cal went in. There was talk of Georgia's interested, and I really haven't heard anything since then. And I do kind of wonder if that came from the Mendoza side to say, hey, look at these suitors. Oh, Georgia's really interested. And maybe something plays out where he winds up becoming a factor. But to me, you pursue Fernando Mendoza. It's not a lock, but he's been really good at Cal. Maybe you see him as your potential starter. These other guys we're talking about, I think you're more like, hey, we need quality depth. We want to push Gunner, and if one of these guys outplays Gunner in 2025 in the spring and leading up to the season, then they would win the job. But they're not a clear cut like, oh, you're bringing this guy in to start for this team. I'll throw it to you, Kipp. What do you make specifically of this quarterback piece of it, like we're talking about with who they've looked at quarterback and maybe what it means for that room in 2025?
It's a hell of a situation. And I think for Georgia, it's like you're bringing these guys in, to watch practice, and they're watching the guy that they would be competing with to start next year get all of the number 1 reps. And honestly, more number 1 reps than you'd even normally get because they're trying to get Gunner ready for a playoff game. So does he look good in practice? How does that impact your opinion while you're trying to recruit basically a backup quarterback? And I think overall for Georgia, they're trying to find someone who has experience because it's not that they don't feel great about Puglisi or the quarterbacks they're bringing in. It's that they want to go into 2025 with someone who's played college football before, because if they have to break glass and bring in another quarterback, they just don't want someone who hasn't played, because they know, just like this schedule, we already know that next year's schedule is just the same but flipped. They're going to be playing big-time college football games. So you don't want to have a guy have his first snap be against Texas. And so I just think that as we said on the other pod, I mean, you said it perfectly, Jordan. They're trying to thread a needle here, and I don't think you can really look at a situation where you have a college football playoff team that's trying to find, a backup quarterback when they have a backup quarterback actually, practicing for the playoffs. So it's unfortunate, but it's also, we're talking about Georgia here. There's some value in being on the quarterback roster at Georgia. You put yourself in a situation to get NFL film, even in practice. I mean, I think we've seen it before. There were times when USC's backup quarterbacks would get drafted, and like Matt Castle, and just play in the NFL. So there's value to being Georgia's backup quarterback, and you do know that you're, you are a snap away from playing on the brightest stage possible. So I think Georgia, is making a very unique pitch. I think the guys that they are looking at right now, I'm not sure if Georgia's going to bring in a quarterback from the guys that they've brought in so far, but I also think we have to remember there are bowl games being played, and there are going to be more guys that go into the portal right after those bowl games. So I just think Georgia's going to be really picky for this situation, and they brought a couple guys in now, and I think they'll probably bring in 3 or 4 more quarterbacks before all is said and done, and put themselves in a situation to get a quarterback with experience on the roster aside from Gunnar Stockton going in next spring.
Yeah, someone in the YouTube comments asked about Jaden Rashada. I mean, he's still in that mix as well. We're kind of trying to decipher what they're going to do, but there's decisions that all these guys are going to have to make over these next few weeks. But the fact that they're bringing in quarterbacks, I mean, tells me that they still want another piece going into 2025. Wanted to talk just briefly about some of the guys Georgia's targeted that really interest me, and a lot of them at this point, guys, are receivers. Dane Key at Kentucky. I've said this on the Junkyard a few times. Of everyone they've targeted to this point, he's the guy that I think Georgia is most confident in getting. But that's not to say it's a lock. I think Ole Miss is trying to get involved there, and he's a really talented receiver. So there's a lot of guys trying to get after him. But J. Michael Sturdivant, I haven't watched much of his film from UCLA, but getting him in the mix. I mean, it's very clear Georgia wants to add some more experience from in the to the receiver room, I should say, and it's something they've done the last few years. And I think when you look at what they are probably going to lose in the receiver room, and also the fact they're bringing in so many freshmen, that they want some more experience. And I'll throw out Jordan Dwyer, who from Idaho, that Chris Hummer and Matt Zenitz reported on Tuesday that Georgia had reached out to. I'm always a little hesitant to do the FCS to FBS move. I always kind of think of it in the same terms of like college basketball with the portal, where it's like, okay, can you really handle this jump up in competition? But he was really impressive at Idaho, and we'll see if he becomes a factor, because there are several other schools that have reached out there. But it's pretty clear to me that Georgia wants to get some help at receiver. Kipp, are there other players besides the quarterbacks we just talked to, guys that Georgia has targeted that have piqued your interest, guys that you're going to be watching these next few weeks?
I do want to start by just saying I think Georgia's initial aggressive pitch to wide receivers may have been reeled back a little bit, just because they do think that they have Nitro Tuggle still on the roster heading into the spring. So I'm not so sure they don't try to, if they get, land Dane Key in the next couple of days, they might feel pretty good about this situation just heading into spring, just because of the guys they brought in from, their high school class. But yeah, I mean, I do think Georgia's still going to look along the defensive line. We've talked about, Shaw going in from North Carolina, Travis Shaw going in from North Carolina, but then we see a guy like Damon Payne going into the portal today from Alabama, and that's the guy who, wasn't able to break through as far as living up to his ranking coming out of high school, but at the same time, a guy that could be in Georgia's two deep at the nose tackle position, which is exactly what they were, hoping from Ja Jarrett. So you have a similar situation there where you can bring a guy in like that. So I do think that I don't think defensive line is, the biggest need, but I do think they're going to continue to look for guys like that, just like Xavier McLeod last cycle. If you get a guy that can help you and play some, important snaps for you next season. I think it's interesting that they brought in Ethan O'Connor from Washington State at the cornerback position, because, again, we were just talking about guys competing for that cornerback spot next year. But he's a guy that they brought in on a visit, and you could tell, because Georgia's only brought in a handful of guys so far that, they're just being really picky. So to have him in town, it kind of shows you that they're willing to add if it's the right guy. And I think that they're in the mix for him. If they find another guy, we thought safety would be the one position where Georgia would really lock in on a couple of guys, but there really hasn't been as much movement there. And overall, I think that's where the transfer portal's been this offseason. You had a couple of years ago, you had starters left and right going into the portal. This class hasn't been like that. There's no Caleb Downs in the portal right now. So I just think that while, it might be fans similar to recruiting are just like, where's the news? Where's the news? Why isn't Georgia doing anything? I really just think Georgia's looking, evaluating, and saying, we're not going to give up these last few roster spots. Don't forget, we still are under this 85 roster rule. And so, we have to make decisions, and we're trying to decide, do we bring in a safety that might not play as much, or we bring in a corner who could actually help us? These are those decisions that are being made. And like I said before, I think these position room battles are probably pretty heated, and they're all battling for guys. But I don't think you're going to see Georgia have a huge transfer portal class, and they're just going to be really picky when all is said and done.
Before we took a break, I did want to answer. There was a few questions earlier in this episode about running back. Damian Cox and Scott Anderson both asked about running back, and I wanted to see if you guys sort of read the situation the way I do. And, I was sort of watching this Justice Haynes situation. He's a Georgia legacy. He goes in the portal from Alabama. Hey, will there be any kind of talk, any smoke about Georgia, at least looking in? And nothing that I've heard to this point about Georgia looking to add him. And I take that to mean that Georgia feels really good about where its running back room is going into 25. Look, we still don't know what Trevor Etienne's going to do. He's going to have a decision to make about the NFL. But you think about some of those other guys who potentially could go in the portal. I took the lack of Justice Haynes smoke or rumor about Georgia to mean that Georgia feels pretty good, and the fact we haven't really heard about any other running backs in the portal, that Georgia feels pretty good about where it is at running back going into next year. Ben, do you kind of get the same sense? I mean, am I looking too much into that when it comes to the Justice Haynes piece?
No, I don't disagree, and I mean especially so since running back was the one position Georgia lost a commitment from the 25 class right there at the end as well. So you'd think if there was a spot that Georgia might feel it needed to scramble a little bit to backfill a position, running back would make sense. I don't know what it means for Trevor Etienne. I don't know if it does even mean anything for Trevor Etienne. I mean, I know somebody in the comment section asked earlier whether we thought he would go pro or not. And I think it's an impossible question to answer right now because Trevor Etienne's missed enough time this year where there's a conversation to be had, but he also could have 3 huge games left in his season, and that could be all it would take for him to just skyrocket his remaining draft stock that he needs to. And so I don't know that it means anything on that front. What I do think it means is they felt really good about all 3 freshmen that came in this year, and all 3 of them played more. Nate played more because he was Georgia's leading rusher this year, but all 3 of them played more than I would have expected them to have played as freshmen. And part of that was Etienne not being fully healthy throughout the year. Part of that was Roderick Robinson getting injured, Branson Robinson staying injured, like all those types of things played into them getting more time. But I think the fact that you bring in a 3 freshman running back class and all 3 of them get used in their own types of ways throughout the course of the year, that's a pretty good sign for what you think they're going to be able to do moving forward.
Ben, you took the words out of my mouth with Trevor because, and I'll plug a story I wrote on Tuesday. It's like predicting what these guys are going to do as far as the NFL goes. That these 3 games, the answer for Trevor Etienne may completely change based on how these next 3 games go. Not only because he's back healthy and he's coming off a heck of an SEC championship game, but we're talking about a situation where we expect to see Gunnar Stockton playing quarterback. Trevor Etienne's going to get the ball a lot, so he could wind up putting together a really strong stretch, and that NFL decision becomes a lot clearer because of how he plays. So I think that is notable too. Kipp, what do you think as far as what we're talking about? If we're kind of reading this the right way, because there's not been much talk about a transfer running back that Georgia likes where it is going into next year.
Yeah, I think it's tough to put a draft grade on Trevor Etienne's right now overall. I would guess probably at his peak during the season. I mean, we were still probably thinking 4th to 5th round just because he didn't have the body of work yet. Now he's probably looking at, a day 3, 6th round, depending on how he does at the combine. So, yeah, there's a lot for him, a lot of motivation for him to really ball out over the next 3 games. So we've seen it before where you think a guy might be a 3rd or 2nd round pick and Kirby convinces him to come back. He does his best recruiting with that. And I mean, he does use the NFL to help him. He gets, the draft grade information to these guys and tries to talk to them. And we know right now, even with the transfer portal, the amount of money that's out there for NIL, we know that a certain quarterback just came back for this season who could have been a 1st round pick had he gone out. So I do think that even if Trevor has a higher draft grade, even though the running back position is one where you're just trying to get to the NFL as soon as possible, it is very possible that he comes back next season, but let's just say that he doesn't. I do think that's a position where you can go into the spring, see how it looks, and you can get someone from the transfer portal a lot easier than some of the other positions. I just think they can find a running back that maybe doesn't have the impact that Trevor Etienne does, but can still, spell Nate Frazier or bring something different to the table than maybe a Roderick Robinson or Chauncey Bowens does. And again, like I said, at this point last year, I mean, like Trevor Etienne not on the roster. You can get a guy like that. And I think that Kirby knows that. And I don't think that's a situation where they need to just go find a running back just to find a running back. As I said before, I think that's one where they can be highly selective. And at the same time, no, if ETN balls out, in the college football playoff, then they're going to be able to show that to anyone in the spring and say, this could be you. And so that's an easy pitch for them. I don't really think that's a situation where they need to panic and go try to find a running back because they think Trevor's leaving.
Yeah, the NIL piece was something I was going to point out too, where, they would put up a good opportunity for him to come back. And we know how much the NFL has devalued running back. So I think it could be a compelling case. But again, there's a lot that's going to change between now and when this season ends. And we'll get a better sense when the year ends of what Trevor Etienne is going to do. We're going to take a quick break, come back, and talk about some of the GHSA state championships going on. Ben's had a chance to be down there for those games. We're going to talk about the college football playoff, and we're going to talk UGA hoops. All right, Ben, you've had a chance to be down in the bins for the start of the GHSA state championship games. To this point, Class A Division II has been played, and Class 4A has also been played. What has stood out to you from what you've gotten to see to this point? And as far as the Georgia side of things, any targets for UGA, anyone like that has caught your attention in the last couple of days?
It feels to me like, talking either present or future, there's just a lot more Georgia influence going on in this year's state championships, the 3-day state championship, 3 days of state championships compared to last year. That said, I mean, the first game of the day yesterday, Bowden versus Brooks County. Bowden won their 3rd straight state championship. There are 2 dudes on both teams. One, the 2026 tight end from Bowden, Caden Prothrow, and then the 2027, I'm going to call him an athlete because he's listed, I think, as a wide receiver, but he also could be, he's got the frame to probably play tight end. He's wired in a way that if he's a defensive player, it wouldn't surprise me at all. His name's George Lamons Jr. Those 2 guys, it's crazy. Like you mentioned, Jordan, this is Class A. This is the smallest of small schools in the state of Georgia, and you went and go look at those guys. You put Caden Prothrow and George Lamons in Falcons jerseys, you wouldn't have been able to tell much of a difference. These are some good-looking football players. Both of them 6'5", maybe. I think Caden Prothrow is measured in some places at 6'6", 209. I'm not sure exactly what all of George Lamons' verified measurables are, but George is a big dude. He was playing with a club foot. Not a club foot, with a club on his foot, boot on his foot. That was limiting some of his, explosiveness. But he was still, they were using him as a wildcat quarterback. He was getting used in the screen game. He was, getting targeted way down the field as well. Both of those guys had some big plays. And, George, I can't believe, this is my first time seeing him. I've heard of him. Both of these guys, I think, are top 35 prospects. I might be slightly off on that, but top 50 prospects in our 2026 rankings and 2027 rankings. So already really high recruiting profiles with offers from just about anyone you could name. But I've seen Caden Prothrow in person at some Georgia games. I was near him at a Georgia basketball game last year where I thought I couldn't tell whether he was a football recruit or a basketball recruit just because of the way that he's built. It could have gone either way. But it was my first time seeing George in person, and I was really impressed. I mean, this is a guy that is going to get recruited by everybody. I couldn't believe he was only a sophomore. So really excited to watch both of those guys in the future. And then the night game last night, North Oconee versus Marist. Really from a Georgia standpoint, all eyes were on Georgia wide receiver signee Landon Roldan. He's so fun to watch. I mean, I had some people texting me during the game that were like, why can't Landon Roldan be Georgia's Travis Hunter? Like, he plays both sides of the ball. He returns kicks. He returns punts. He is truly dynamic. I mean, he is just dynamic in every sense of the word, whether that be off the ball, with the ball in his hands, blocking. I mean, he sprung one of their big runs from their running back in the game yesterday. He just likes to get physical with guys. I mean, he is an athlete. This is actually his second state championship. One as a baseball player, as a center fielder, now one as a receiver, as a defensive back, as a return man. There's a reason why I can't remember if it was you, Kipp, or Jordan, but one of you mentioned him as your guy that you think could be a day one contributor for Georgia. I feel as strongly about that as ever after watching him yesterday. I mean, he is, he's going to draw a lot of Ladd McConkey comparisons for the reasons that you would expect him to. He's built so much more than Ladd McConkey is at this point in time. I mean, this is a guy that is well put together. It still blows my mind. And this just shows you the nature of this business and how guys can get overlooked and can get missed easier than you would think, especially if you don't run track or you're not going to all of these off-season camps and 7-on-7s and doing all of these types of things. You can sometimes get missed because this was a guy that did not have many big-time offers at the beginning of this year. He wasn't even ranked by us until the middle of the summer. And now he's a high 4-star. I think that he probably could still be considered underrated, despite the fact that he is a well-ranked 4-star. And that's just, the nature of how this goes sometimes. I think Georgia really, really got a steal with him. I would be remiss if I did not call out Kamari Brooks, the 2026 edge rusher / tight end. He did it all for them last night. Marist was running the veer, some of the eye discipline, eye control, stand your ground, do the things that you got to do the right way. Kamari Brooks, I think what might have been, unexpected from Marist's side of things, a lot of times they go up against really talented edge rushing types. And I think they can take advantage of them in that style of offense because they're more used to just getting after the passer. They're not as disciplined in what their keys are defensively. I think Kamari Brooks, what he showed to me more than anything last night is he does what he is supposed to do as a defensive player. I think Marist realized really early in that game that Kamari Brooks was going to be a problem for them because when he was supposed to sit and stay, he sat and stayed. When he was supposed to be able to, get after the ball carrier, read and react, he was doing all of that as well. He had a big play on offense at tight end that got them deep into the red zone that punched in the go-ahead touchdown for North Oconee. He didn't score the touchdown, but he put them in position to score the go-ahead touchdown. Talking with some folks that were around last night, I think that he made himself some money last night. Let's put it that way. I think that Kamari Brooks had a really, really important state championship game. I will say, college coaches, because it's a quiet period, recruits can be on campus this week, but coaches cannot be out on the road. It's the rare year where FBS coaches are not in the bins for these state championship games. But if you're the father of a player on a team, you're obviously allowed to be there. North Oconee had, David Pollock, which I will tease. I did talk to David Pollock last night about Landon Roldan. He's known him since he was in 7th grade. We'll have some good stuff at Dogs 24/7 talking with him about the incoming Georgia wide receiver. But Harrison Faulkner, the son of Buster Faulkner, is there. So Buster Faulkner's in attendance for that game. Matt Luke's son is a defensive back on North Oconee that had a big pass breakup that ended the game. Matt Luke's at the game. And so, if you're walking around the game, you're seeing, you see a Clemson logo on Matt Luke, you see the Georgia Tech on Buster Faulkner, and it's like there are college guys that are taking note of some of these things that are happening. And, I wasn't talking to any of them directly about any of this stuff, obviously, but you can, see some facial expressions, see them notice some things. And I definitely think that Kamari Brooks impressed a lot of people from that game last night. And he's someone that will, without question, be a Georgia target. And he will not just be a Georgia target. I mean, he was wearing the Tennessee headband last night. I know that Clemson, South Carolina, Florida State, Alabama, Auburn, these are all programs that are going to be recruiting him throughout the next 3 to 4 months as he starts to close in on his finalists.
Kipp, you feeling better about that Landon Roldan projection after what he was able to do?
I'll be honest. I just saw him line up like right in the beginning of the game, and I was like, this guy, I completely had him wrong. And I had watched the film, and just seeing him, in that game, I was like, this guy is got length and he's pretty physical. And so, I actually feel really good now just because I'm like, what you have to bring to the table to get on the field early for Georgia. And even if it's, early special teams play, I just think that, there's no way this guy's not in the field and carving out a role and probably, just earning the respect of Kirby Smart and the confidence to put him in important situations. So, he definitely caught my eye. And I don't think, Kamari Brooks just looks perfectly built for the edge position at Georgia. Like, I'm like, this guy, the physicality that he plays with, I'm like, the comparisons are awful and they just set everyone up for failure. But I'm like, this guy plays the game the way that like Nolan Smith does. And I just think that that's an easy recruitment like for Georgia to put this guy on the board, knowing this guy can set the edge for us and do it. I don't know if that's the role you recruit someone to do because it's not the flashiest of roles, but I definitely think that being a position that is very important for Georgia, and seeing the inconsistent play specifically in that role over the last couple of years, I just think that Kamari Brooks has to have skyrocketed up the board. I assume Georgia already knew this about him, but it just, for me, watching him play, I just felt like I know he can play a number of positions, but I think that that is an outstanding fit for Georgia's defense specifically.
I will say Kamari Brooks also had me thinking last night. I don't know how realistic it is, but after we've seen Travis Hunter happen now, and it was glorious to get to enjoy that this year, why not an edge rusher, tight end, two-way player that wins the Heisman? Why can't we have one of those? Am I asking too much?
Absolutely not.
If you're going to see it, it would have to, Elias Williams would have to be that guy, right? That's the guy where we were like, can this guy play edge? And then you just saw him line up at tight end once. You're like, okay, no, just keep him there. That's the spot. But that frame coming off the edge would be a nightmare. So if it's going to happen, I think that's the kind of just freak athlete where good luck convincing Kirby to do that. But it would definitely be a huge recruiting pitch moving forward if you take a guy like that and give Todd Hartley and share a Heisman in both their position rooms.
We can all dream. I can promise you that. I did want to shout out North Oconee. I saw an alum in the comments, so cool to see them get the job done. Ben, with the games ahead, what should Georgia fans be on the lookout for? You've done a very good job on Dogs 24/7 of giving the heads up of like, hey, here's the guys who are playing, the guys you need to know. What should they be on the lookout for in these next few days of championships?
Well, you got to start with tonight. If you're listening to this on Tuesday, I can still tell you to make sure to watch GPB Sports tonight because Milton versus Langston Hughes, it's not often that you get a Georgia high school state championship game that has 3 Georgia signees playing in the game. And quite frankly, I've been breaking this down as well. And I have, I'm going to put something out on social media about it earlier. The number of signees from Langston Hughes and Milton just in the 2025 class, guys that have already signed, is, as good of a state championship game as you're going to see. It's as close to Power 4 football as you're probably getting at the high school level watching that Milton versus Langston Hughes game tonight. And again, that's just talking about the 2025 class. Both of those teams are loaded in 2026 and 2027 as well. And so watching CJ Wiley and Ethan Barbour tonight take on Dontrell Glover and Langston Hughes. These are both teams. All 3 of those guys have won a state championship in their high school careers already. One of 2 things will happen. Either Dontrell Glover will bookend his high school career with a state championship as a freshman and a state championship as a senior, or CJ Wiley and Ethan Barbour will win back-to-back state championships for Milton. And so either way, if you're someone that's trying to watch that game and have a positive outlook for Georgia's future, you're going to be able to find that in doses in that Milton Langston Hughes game. I think, on Wednesday, there will be a couple of games that stand out. Obviously, Prince Avenue from nearby program. Christian Garrett was committed to Georgia at one point, so you can sort of watch what's going to Georgia Tech instead of coming to Georgia and what could have potentially been. He's just not a name that we ended up talking a lot about, but it does sort of make you wonder, given how things went at defensive line down the stretch, whether or not Georgia would maybe like to have how that one was handled back. But either way, there's a running back at Prince Avenue named Andrew Beard. He's the nephew of Garrison Hurst. I don't, put in many predictions on 2027 prospects this far out, but I mean, he is a guy that feels like primed to end up at Georgia. He could play running back. He could probably play safety, but the statistics that this guy has put up as a sophomore at Prince Avenue at running back are unbelievable. I haven't actually watched them play a game yet this season, so I'm excited to watch Andrew Beard in person. And then the night game, you've got Carrollton versus Grayson. I think we talked about it on the last episode. There's probably not many recruits in the 2026 class that Georgia wants as much as middle linebacker Tyler Atkinson. I've watched Grayson a couple times already this year, and they are just a fun football team to watch. They've got a lot of really solid young talent in the 2027 and 2028 classes. But when you're looking, at the 2025 class, they obviously have Nick Brooks, the Texas signee at tackle. He's just a big, massive dude. He looks like a lot of the offensive line signees that Georgia's had in the past. He's going to play at Texas. But Tyler Atkinson will be the reason that you're watching that game as a Georgia fan. And then Julian Lewis. I mean, this is a guy that you've heard about forever in Georgia high school football. I think for him to be able to finish up his high school football career with a state championship would be pretty poetic stuff, just, with the way that his high school journey has gone. There are a lot of dudes on that Carrollton team. Probably 2026 wide receiver Ryan Mosley is the one that I look at as like, hey, if there's a guy that screams guy could end up at Georgia, Ryan Mosley is probably that guy. But, with the pull that Julian Lewis is going to have with a lot of those pass catchers, I think Colorado is going to be a serious option for a lot of those guys as well.
Great stuff, Ben, and I know that we're all excited to watch these games. I'm going to make sure and have some popcorn handy to watch what I think is going to be some really compelling state championships over these next few days. Speaking of championships, let's turn our focus over to the start of the college football playoffs. It's going to get underway on Friday. And in total this weekend, there's going to be 4 games. You got Indiana at Notre Dame on Friday night. And then on Saturday, SMU at Penn State, Clemson at Texas, Tennessee at Ohio State. Now, guys, let's focus on Indiana at Notre Dame first, because the winner of that game will play Georgia in the Sugar Bowl on New Year's Day. I'm going to start with you, Kipp. Not so much with a prediction, but what are you paying attention to in Indiana at Notre Dame? What is the thing that you want to see when this game is played on Friday night?
I want to see if, which of these teams is for real, because the stats tell you that these guys kind of blew through their schedules. They had, 2 of the top offenses and defenses in college football. So are we going to learn, when they're both facing possibly a stronger opponent, if they're legit? And I just think, which one of these quarterbacks is going to, handle pressure better? I think you got Riley Leonard, a guy that, again, can run as well as any quarterback in the country. Indiana, their run defense has been really strong all year. So let's see who wins that battle. And at the same time, will Indiana's offensive line be able to protect Curtis Rourke enough for him to find his pass catchers? That line did not protect well against Ohio State. I think Notre Dame's defensive front is in that same realm. So that's where I'm wondering, that probably will be the difference in the game, is one quarterback will be able to continue getting the offense going, even if it's with the legs. And I do think, that Curtis Rourke's probably going to have to make some really quick decisions back there in the pocket.
You hit on the big ones for me, Kip. I mean, I want to see the protection because I think specifically when you look ahead to the Georgia matchup for either of these teams, I mean, Georgia in the games where they've had to have it, and I think specifically the 2 games against Texas, I mean, they've affected the quarterback. I mean, they got after Quinn Ewers. So can either team protect the QB? I think, Riley Leonard to me looks like the harder matchup for Georgia, but let's see how how the Notre Dame offensive line protects him against, I think, a good Indiana team. Now, good enough to win a national title, I don't think quite that, but a team I do think is capable of beating Notre Dame. I want to see how they do keeping the quarterbacks upright and what that looks like. Ben, what about you? What are you looking for in this matchup? Anything in particular, really catch your attention?
Well, I'm coming into this matchup thinking that the best unit on either team is the Notre Dame defense. And I think that does present some challenges for Georgia for some obvious reasons. And so I'm really going to be looking to see, there's a reason that Notre Dame is a touchdown favorite. So I think that they have the leg up in this game. I think that if I'm just operating on assumptions, that's who I think is going to be facing off against Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. So really I'm seeing, is Notre Dame who I think that they are? I think that a lot of folks have had a tendency to say, oh, Georgia caught a good draw. And I think that is good, or that is true from some standpoint because of all the teams you're avoiding on the other side of the bracket. But I also think that if you're having to play Notre Dame in the first round or in the quarterfinals, you're playing a much better team than I think anybody is giving them credit for. Now, I could change that opinion depending on how I see them play against Indiana, because obviously I think the default for everyone is, well, they lost to Northern Illinois. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. And I get it. They lost to Northern Illinois, and that is not a good group of 5 team. They also only gave up 16 points in that game. So their defense, even in their worst day of the year, still had a good day. And so, I want to see if Notre Dame is who I think that they are, which I think is a very capable football team with a run game that can cause you some fits and a really, really sound defense. And if that's who they are, then I think Georgia's going to be in for a fight in the Sugar Bowl. Now, can Notre Dame win the game against Indiana without proving to me that they are that? I do think that they can, because I know Indiana's caught some flack throughout the year, probably more than they've deserved, but I think now is the time where you start to realize the difference between rosters at a place like Notre Dame and a place like Indiana. And these playoffs where you have a bunch of preparation and it is, win or go home, I think is where you're going to start to see that show up more. And so I think that that's what I'm expecting to see. If that's not what I see and Notre Dame still finds a way to win, I'm going to start to like Georgia's chances a little bit more. But I think that, I'm intrigued to watch that one because, again, I think that a lot of people are talking about whoever wins that game, like they're going, Georgia should be able to roll into the semifinals. And I think that if it's Notre Dame, that's not going to be the case.
I totally agree. I think that, don't count your chicks before they hatch, especially if it is Notre Dame. I want each of us to give a score prediction for this. I'm going to start. I'm picking Notre Dame 27-21. I do think Indiana covers. I think it's a good game, but again, it's at Notre Dame. I think being in South Bend with this opportunity, Marcus Freeman just got a big extension. I think Notre Dame's going to find a way to get this done. Ben, what do you think as far as the score of this one?
I agree. I think that Notre Dame is probably going to have a little bit more success defensively than that. So I'll say 31-13, which I think was the score of their game against Georgia Tech. So I think that that's similar to how I expect this one to go. I think Georgia Tech hung around a little bit early and then Notre Dame pulled away. I think that's what they'll do against Indiana as well.
Kipp, what you got?
Yeah, I mean, I think I see this one going like 30-20 Notre Dame, just because that defense is actually a perfect matchup. I mean, to completely attack Indiana, they blitz a lot and they play a lot of man coverage. And so I just think that, and they do a really, really good job with that. They go, you can get a couple yards on the ground against us. We'll give up a run play here and there. But you're not gonna complete consecutive passes on us. I think they're the best in the country as far as completion rate, and they blitz like on a third of dropbacks. So they're putting a lot of faith in these corners to play man defense, and it's done really well. So I really think that it's a really, really bad draw for Indiana. But I still love the in-state rivalry game. We've seen those games, go a different way than what we think, even when there's a little bit of a talent difference. But I just think that this is going to be a nightmare game for Work, and it sucks because I'd love to see a game like that. I'd love to see Georgia take on a matchup like that, but I don't see them coming out on top in this one.
All right, let's look at the other games quickly. SMU at Penn State, Clemson at Texas, Tennessee at Ohio State. I'll start with you, Ben. Just with any of these games, do any of these matchups like really catch your eye of like, oh, I'm going to watch all 60 minutes of this one?
I mean, Jordan, I'm going to sit there and watch all 60 minutes of every single one of these games. They could have put any brands against each other in these games, and I was going to sit there and watch all 60 minutes of them, knowing that I don't have to be in Sanford Stadium or some bull site watching these games, and I'm going to be able to actually kick back and enjoy the first round of the college football playoff is like, I mean, you don't need me to explain to you how awesome it's going to be. I think the Tennessee-Ohio State game is the one that everyone's going to say is like the game, and for obvious reasons. One, it's the 8-9, so presumably it's the best, tightest matchup. Two, it's going to be two of the louder fan bases in the world, regardless of what the outcome of it is. And so we're sure to have a good time online on Saturday, no matter who's winning or losing. I'm sure that there will be plenty of officiating blaming to go around given the matchup and the fan bases that are going to be involved in that one. So I'm dialed in and excited for that. I also think that that's a game where the final score could be like 7-3. It's going to be really cold. Those are two of the best defenses in the country right now. Neither of them give up very many points. And so, hammer the under. If you're trying to have some responsible gambling fun in a state that allows for responsible gambling fun, which is not a lot of the people that are listening to this because the state of Georgia can't figure itself out. I would take the under in that game.
I appreciate the gambling advice to the few who are able to follow through with it. Kipp, do one of these three games catch your attention or really got you peaked looking into this game?
I mean, that Tennessee-Ohio State game, we're talking about a coach that could be on the hot seat if he doesn't win this game in the playoff. I mean, Ryan Day just lost to a 6-5 Michigan team, the fourth time in a row he's lost to them. I still can't believe that they got to host this game after like that performance. Like I don't know why I'm surprised because again, we watched the number one team lose a game by 3 points a year ago and fall, 5 spots out. So I'm just, why am I shocked that they do the exact, opposite with the Ohio State team that underperforms? But this looks like probably the coldest game possible. So this is our greatest chance for snow in a college football playoff game. So that's what I'm watching. I'm watching the weather report. I want to see if this game or the Penn State game, I want to see just the players just sliding all over the place, pure chaos. And for SEC fans to see a Tennessee team and fan base have to deal with that. I mean, there's a little bit of extra entertainment factor right there. But I think that if Tennessee goes up to Ohio State and wins, I will be on the Ohio State boards immediately. I mean, that is we want to talk about the misery index. It will be sky high if they lose that game. So that's the one where you just know that the most chaos possible is that game. So it's number one for me, and it's an incredible matchup. And I just hope that Mother Nature plays her role and brings an extra wrinkle into this matchup.
All right, let's give our picks. You don't have to give scores, just who you think are going to win these three games. I'm going to take Ohio State. The weather piece of that has me hesitant to pick Tennessee. Picking Texas over Clemson, I don't think Clemson is good enough to beat that Texas team. My upset, I'm picking SMU at Penn State. I think it was Alex Kirshner from a Split Zone Duo who said that James Franklin was destined to be the first coach to lose a home playoff game, and it just feels right. I really like SMU and Rhett Lashley. they gave Clemson all they could handle. I know they were a favorite in that game, but I think that there's going to be an upset between these three games, and I think SMU is going to be the team to deliver it. Kipp, what do you got between these Saturday games?
We've already mentioned one. So, again, think Notre Dame wins by 10 points. I also think Texas wins probably by more than a touchdown. I just think that that team is a lot better than they're getting credit for. I know that they didn't play the toughest schedule, and then Georgia did pretty well against them, but I still think that that's a team that's going to I think they're going to perform really well against Clemson. The Tennessee-Ohio State game's tough because I don't think it's gonna. I think it's gonna be a field goal in that game, and I think in that weather, like I said, kicking should be a large room for just pure chaos in that, like block kicks, return kicks. But I do think Ohio State comes out on top, and I agree with you. I don't believe in a James Franklin team winning a big game until they show me, and they're going to have to prove it. So I got SMU winning that one as well. I'll just say by a field goal.
All right, Ben, what you got?
I'm going to fade you guys on Penn State. I think that everyone's disrespecting them this year. I think that they're a much better football team than anybody has been giving them credit for. I think that Drew Aller, when he's playing really well, especially, is one of the best quarterbacks in college football. I truly, truly, truly believe that. Also, James Franklin wins games where he's favored. He loses games where he's an underdog. So I'm going to take them to win. I'm so torn on this Tennessee-Ohio State game, because I think that these two defenses are so good. So I think it comes down to which team has some random big play that, changes the field. And for that, I'm probably just going to go with who I think is the best offensive player on either team, and that's Jeremiah Smith. So I'm going to go with Ohio State by a very small margin on a very small score. And then I will take Texas to win. I think the Texas defense might be the best unit of any team in this entire playoff. So I think for that reason, I'm predicting them to win. I still have enough question marks about this Texas offense that I think 11 points is a lot of points against Clemson, but I still like Texas to win.
I think it's going to be an entertaining weekend, and I am definitely excited to kick back and watch it, as I know Kipp and Ben are. Georgia men's basketball minute to get us out of here. Georgia beat Grand Canyon 73-68 in Holiday Hoops Given down in Atlanta on Saturday. Pretty impressive performance, some stuff to clean up, but Santo Surreal had his best game as a dog, 4 or 5 loud dunks. They did a very good job of keeping the Antelopes kind of at arm's length. Grand Canyon made a run in the final minutes, but Georgia made the plays they had to have. Guys, they're 9-1. I think that's only the second time since 1996 that they've started 9-1. They've got a legitimate chance to end non-conference play 12-1. They play again on Thursday, hosting Buffalo. And then after that, they have Charleston Southern and South Carolina State to end non-con. So they've taken care of business over and over. Big win in a neutral site, although, Georgia, I'm sure, had more fans there in State Farm. But Georgia continuing to roll. I think they got like 18 points in the latest AP poll. So not quite ranked, still watching for that to happen. But the Bulldogs on the hardwood continue to play well.
What's up with that? Why are they getting so few votes in the AP poll?
I can't really decide, because I thought that there was a chance that, that they might be ranked on Monday and didn't quite. I think they came in essentially like the 12th or 13th most as far as also receiving votes. But I just think about the field that you have to go through to vote in the top 25 of college basketball, just how many different teams. I've said this for years. Like, I voted, I think, for a year for the football poll, and I thought that was hard. I don't know how the AP voters do it for basketball. There's just so many different teams. I think that's kind of what it boils down to, And I mean, to only have your one loss to Marquette, they've got a really good resume, but other than beating St. John's, I think their non-conference slate and wins, maybe not quite as impressive on the whole as some other teams.
They won't have a choice to ignore them once SEC play begins. I mean, don't they just start with like 5 top 20 teams to start conference play. I think, we'll be able to ignore them a month from now. But at the same time, we're talking about a player who is looking like a lottery pick. I think Asanua probably goes 8 to 10 right now for the draft we're today. And start watching, voters. I know there's probably a lot of AP voters watching this podcast because it's really popular among the media. But yeah, come on, watch this team play. Watch Asanua play. Watch a team that's now a force on the boards. Which again, that's always going to play. I see that now with the Hawks. If you can attack the boards and gain some extra possessions, then there's just more margin for error when your shots aren't falling, which we've seen with Georgia. With if the three ball isn't going down, you can sneak some points and manufacture scoring through the boards, and I think that's what Georgia's big men are giving them, and we haven't seen that. I mean, I don't even know ever really with the Georgia basketball team. So that should play in what will be an extremely tough conference schedule. Georgia's the best we've seen them in a long time, at the same time that the conference is as good as we've ever seen it. So it's, kind of unfortunate for Georgia, but at the same time, you'd rather have a good Georgia team regardless.
Okay, that's your NBA Cup Eastern Conference runner-up, Atlanta Hawks, by the way.
We are trade buyers right now. Okay, we're looking for help instead of tanking. So I know that tankathon's usually been bookmarked for every Hawks fan at this point in the season, usually. But hey, watch Trae Young out there, and you watch the Great Barrier Thief. I think Dyson Daniels is probably the most fun Hawks player. No offense, Trae, that I've ever seen. That's my favorite player, probably since Mookie. So it's been a while, and wow, the Hawks may have actually won a trade. So I'm going to enjoy it for as long as I can.
Wanted to just mention, because Kipp mentioned this. This is the start of Georgia's SEC play. At number 17, Ole Miss. At home against number 4, Kentucky. At home against number 14, Oklahoma. At number 1, Tennessee. At home against number 2, Auburn. So,
and then I think you get a one-off night, and then you go and play at number 7, Florida.
Yeah, and that off night is at Arkansas against John Calipari. So good luck. But I do think this team is a lot better. And I'll say this, they're a whole lot more fun to watch. And as someone who has followed Georgia basketball for a long time, and for the fans listening, I think everyone can agree that's enough. This is a fun team to watch, and it's not always been that way. We're going to end the episode there. I appreciate Kipp and Ben for popping on. Thanks to everyone who watched this live, or one who is watching or listening to it after the fact. Be sure to subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcast. Please rate, review, follow the show. Let us know what you think. We want to keep you guys coming back, because there's a ton of stuff to get into. Obviously, go to dogs247.com. We're going to have all the scoop there on the transfer portal, guys that Georgia's looking at and potentially adding in the coming weeks. Go to our YouTube, go to our TikTok, subscribe, both places there. A lot of good video content, both on both YouTube and TikTok. So we will end the episode there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.